Hi everyone. Today I'm going to demonstrate 8 watercolor special effects. These little tricks can help you solve problems and make your paintings more interesting. Plus they're easy and most involve ordinary household items. So let's get started. People have asked me questions about masking fluid. It's a rubbery liquid that you paint or dab on to protect areas that you want to stay white. Masking fluid will ruin your brush, so use a cheap one. I'm going to paint a sky behind these farm buildings after this dries. Next up are wipeouts. This blue is completely dry, which makes lightening it harder. Wetting the area down brings the paint back to life, and then I'm soaking it up with a dry or thirsty brush. Masking tape can help create straight edges. I'm using a damp paper towel to scrub the area, and with a little effort, the space between the tape is lighter. You can also use a sponge or a regular towel. But you can rarely get all the way back to white, especially if the paint is dried, so learn to identify problems as soon as they happen and you'll have an easier time. And here's what those areas look like after they're dry. And now I'm going to paint that sky. See how I'm painting all over the buildings and the telephone pole with my big brush? Those things are safe under the masking fluid. And I'm creating a variegated wash by dropping in some sunset colors and letting them blur together. In most landscape watercolors, the sky is painted first. And sometimes you want a flat wash or a fading graded wash for a clear sky, but clouds can make your painting experience a lot more fun. This sky will take a while to dry, and once it does, I'll show you how to remove the masking fluid. Speaking of skies, here are some super easy ways to create clouds. First, I'm painting the surface turquoise, and while it's wet, I'll dab at it. First, here's a dry tissue, and this is a wet one. How about a cotton ball? Or a paper towel, either wet or dry. Here's what the clouds look like when they're dry. I really like the crisp edges of the dry tissue cloud. Anything damp will leave softer edges. Next, I'm going to use everyday table salt to create a pattern that can resemble snow or stars. This effect is more dramatic with darker colors, so I'm painting the surface a bluish purple first. While the paint is still wet, I will sprinkle some salt on top. You don't want to dump it on. Less is more here. And I'm going to take a break and let that purple dry some more. This next technique is relatively new to me, and I find it totally fascinating. First, I'll paint the area with some darker colors. You can use whatever you like here. Then I'm going to wrinkle up some plastic wrap and lay it on the wet paint. Then I'll leave it alone until it's dry. Meanwhile, I'll sprinkle some more salt on the purple. I took the plastic wrap off about a half an hour later, and look at the unusual shapes and weathered texture. I could imagine painting rocks or a tree trunk using plastic wrap. And here's what happened with the salt. Once it was dry, I brushed it off, and the salt had absorbed some of the paint and left these delicate shapes behind. I sprinkled the salt on immediately in the top half, and you can see how the shapes are blurrier and larger than the ones on the bottom, where the paint had a chance to dry a bit. I think those little shapes are gorgeous. Salt takes a lot of practice, but through trial and error, you'll be able to time your sprinkling just right. Next, I'm going to get rough with the paper and cut into it with my exacto knife. I'm not going all the way through, but I am going deep enough to create some grooves before painting over it with green. The paint settles into the grooves. I'm also cutting grooves into the wet paint. Once the paint is dry, the lines created by the first set of grooves are barely noticeable, but the ones I cut into the wet paint are still there. This is a wonderful way to create ultra-thin lines or cross-hatching, and it's almost like drawing. Spattering is a fun, kind of mindless way to create a galaxy of tiny dots, and all you need is an old toothbrush. Apply a small amount of paint to the bristles and flick it onto the paper. Do it on a wet surface and it looks like fireworks. Once it's dry, you'll notice that the first set of dots hasn't changed, but the wet surfaces cause the paint to diffuse. You can also try spattering multiple colors onto your paper. Next, I'm going to use a spray bottle on some bright colors. This is an unpredictable tool to use, but it might be just the thing for abstract paintings or an uninteresting sky. For best results, allow the paint to dry a bit before you spray it and then dab it with a tissue. Or, while it's still wet, blast it with some water to create a soft highlight. You can create a similar effect by rubbing your dry painting with sandpaper, believe it or not, but I think the spray did a beautiful job here, and it was so easy. And now that the sky is dry, I'm going to remove the masking fluid. You can do this with a rubber cement pickup that you can find in an art supply store, or you can make one yourself by pouring a tablespoon of rubber cement onto a clean, flat, non-porous surface. Let it dry and work it into a ball with your fingers. I normally use masking fluid sparingly and use it to make tiny dots or small shapes. You have to work a little harder to remove big areas. And here's the finished product. I hope you'll try some of these special effects. And I think that this would make a great activity for children too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.